I know there wasn't anything more exciting to see an airplane, and I knew every airplane, built every model I could find. And so what I wanted to do was be an airline pilot. So in 1937, I was going to college, Pacific Lutheran, and they offered what they called civilian pilot training, CPT. The government paid for flying, and so I mean, this is a dream, because at that time it was like $30 an hour, which is unheard of as far as, you know, getting a license. The government would pay your license all the way up to 50 or some hours. And so for about 2 hours a day, I'd go out to a little place and fly, which later proved kind of a bum deal because I didn't go to school that much that semester. Well, the second semester I decided that, you know, it was about time I settled down, because I had to have 2 years of college in order to get into the Air Force, which was my whole idea. Well, during this time, in 38, I finished the primary, and then I took what we call secondary, which was a bigger airplane. And I started out in a 60-horse Cub, which is a small single-wing plane, and then I took flying lessons in a Waco UP-7, which had a 125-horse radial engine, which was a tremendous thing. And anyway, the Army used them as primary trainers, which, you know, didn't interest me one way or the other. I finished that up, and then I took advanced training, and I went to Yakima, and I flew a staggered wing. Well, anyway, it was a beautiful aircraft, and I learned how to do instruments, because I knew how to fly. I had my license, and I knew how to fly, but I had to have instrument training, because that's where a lot of the pilots ran into trouble. Is some of these clouds had little hard rocks in the middle of them, and that's, you know, you had to learn how to use the instruments. In the meantime, guess what? The war come along, and so the only thing I got to do is to either join the Army or the Navy. And so I had a buddy, and he found out through the Army. He and I went to the Army, and we passed our test. He found out he was colorblind. I passed. So I didn't know what to do. Well, anyway, Dick went on up to Canada and joined the Canadian Air Force. And I heard that I could go to the Navy, and they were paying $500 a year bonus. So I thought that was real neat. Yeah. So I just took the Navy test, and I flunked it. Well, it took me another 6 months to pass that test. Well, by this time, we're well into the war. We're like now into August and September. So I finally passed, and then I got called, and they said, well, you can either go to primary training or learn how to fly, or you can go into this wonderful deal where you went to St. Mary's pre-flight school, and you could build up your body. And it was just like going to a spa, you know, just marvelous deal. We played golf, tennis, and did this for 16 weeks to build up your body. And I thought, man, I couldn't beat anything like that. Well, actually, I found out it was a torture machine. I mean, they really just worked out living daylights out of you. And instead of taking 8 weeks, it took me 16 weeks because I got a knee injury. So from there, I went to what we call primary training. Primary training, you learn how to fly. Of course, I already knew how to fly, so our syllabus at that time was cut short. Each syllabus was cut by so many hours because we knew how to land. But of course, I didn't know how to land like the Navy wanted. Navy wanted to land on 3 points. That's the 2 wheels and a tail skid. I used to come in, which we call grease in, and land on 2 wheels. That was the Army way. And of course, I was criticized because they knew that I had taken Army training. It was kind of hard for me to come in kind of a 3-point attitude and drop down on the ground, but I soon learned how to land an airplane the rough way. Well, to make a long story short, I went through primary and then secondary training, and then each time we'd advance on to different syllabuses, and finally wound up in Texas and went through advanced training. I went through gunnery, went through radio. Of course, each plane we wanted to do was more advanced. Was used to flying a plane that didn't have flaps, so we used to, we would slip, and we'd put the plane at an angle and drop down and land into a field. Instead of using, we didn't have flaps, and finally the first plane we had on was built by Vultee. We called them a Vultee vibrator, that they had flaps, and you used to crank them down with a hand crank. And man, this is really something. You come in, you know, and it's just like a big plane now, and all you got flaps. So the next thing we would have was going to have the Texan, and that was going to be a little more advanced training when we got into gunnery. Well, then we were going to fly the Texan. Well, each one of these planes we had to do so much groundwork, and then after we got in there, we had to have an instructor take us out and teach us how to land the plane, show us the different things. And boy, this Texan, I thought it was just the most marvelous plane I'd ever seen in my life. It was all metal, and it had retractable landing gear. It had twin 50s up in the nose. And it was just like a regular aircraft, other than you wouldn't want to go to war in such a thing. Finally, we got through all the deal, and doing radio and all the instrument work, and the day came when I got my wings. Well, then, of course, you figure, well, you have to go to an advanced school of some kind, either dive bombing, fighters, or bombers. And they were real eager for dive bombers for some reason, so I went to dive bombing school down in Miami, Florida, and we flew old aircrafts. I can't even remember what the name of, I think they were called BTs, but they were an old plane. They had corrugated wings, and I do mean corrugated. You know what a corrugated metal roof is. Their wings were corrugated. And you had bomb sights, and those bomb sights was a tube that you looked through. And it was an old plane, but it was, at one time, was the #1 plane for the Navy. And then now, of course, they had this new advanced one called an SBD. Well, I learned how to dive bomb, and I got through there, and then they said, well, we're not quite ready for you, so we're going to send you through fighter school. So I went through fighter school, and I flew F-2As, Brewster Buffaloes. Not many people know about them, but there was an article in Life magazine about 6 months ago that said, you know, that was the worst airplane ever built. It was the only plane I ever flew that had a tag in there that said if the engine quits to bail out, because it would glide like a rock. Went through fighter school, and by then the guy said, well, the best thing we can know now is to send you out to the West Coast. That's fine, that's where I live, in the West Coast. And I got my first 30-day leave. And I've been gone away from home now for almost a year and a half. So I took off from Miami, Florida, went to Chicago, and learned how to land an airplane on a carrier. And they had a couple old tankers up there that they turned into carriers, put on steel decks, and I landed, had 5 landings, and one of this SNJ, which was a plane I really loved, but it was not built to land on carriers because the hook was just hung down just by gravity, and when you wanted it up, a guy came underneath the plane, pulled it up, and then you took the rope and put the slack around your armrest. So the 5 of us took off that morning, and we flew out there, and we made 5 landings, and as soon as we got through the 5th landing, I was carrier qualified, which meant now usually you'd have to be sent on board a carrier. You wouldn't be land-based. So they sent me out to base would be Alameda, California. And this is where I first flew what I called a aircraft that you could actually use it for combat. It was called the SBD. And of course, there was an entirely different program. We learned how to fly in formation. We learned how to dive bomb. And this is the first time we ever had a man in the back seat, and I had a gunner, a radio man, and he was the he had wanted to fly, and this is his way of flying, was be in the back seat. So I asked him, I said, well, why did you, how come you got it in my plane? He says, well, there was two of us, and he said that your two of you came in that day, and you was Beetle and Freet, and so we're going to flip coins who was going to get who. Because he said, we heard both of you were pretty hot pilots, so the Faro got me by a flip. So that meant that Faro was going to be in the back seat, and that meant he was going to go with me on board a carrier into combat. So, of course, the time had just, you know, now a whole year has gone by, and it's still, I'm in the United States. I'm nowhere near any combat, so we fly on different stations down in the Pacific coast. Alameda was where we joined, and then we went from there to Watsonville, and Crow's Landing, Santa Maria, and there was another couple other little fields that we flew out of. We learned to dive bomb, and we 1 month we had a new skipper came in, and we dive bombed probably 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I mean, we just went out and we dived 10 times. We had these little practice bombs in our wing, and this Rocky would send us out, and we thought, man, this is really hell. Have to go out and learn how to. But we got real good at dive bombing, and so we were thankful for that later on. So after we finished all the different phases there, most of it was night flying. We learned how to land on a carrier at night, which is a eerie thing. I mean, I have nightmares yet thinking about coming on board a carrier at night. Daytime was rough enough, but at night it was a horrible experience, because you'd be out there in the water and there'd be no actual visual way to see, you know, the horizon, and you'd fly by instruments 250 feet above the water, fly by time, they make you turn, and then you turn around and finally make another turn, and this you should be able to see the ship. Now the ship had lights were like, I call them scuppers, that they'd only see the light shining backwards. That's the only way you could see it, is coming straight on. Then here was a guy sitting up in front of this thing. It looked like he's suspended in the air, and that's a landing signal officer, and he's got on reflective clothing. And you can see this arm sticking straight out. It looks like he's standing on nothing. And you're coming in on one straight line of lights, and this guy standing up, and you see the flag crossover, which meant cut your engine, which then we'd land. So we had to get 5 landings in. Well, there was about, that time we lost 5 guys on night flying that missed the deck, hit the water, and you know, it was really a toughie. We're qualified for night carrier landings, which is meant we could be night fighters if we're, you know, happened to be lucky or unlucky. So next thing you know is they said, we're going to send you to Hawaii, and there you wait for your ship, and then you go out into combat. Well, they didn't know that combat then meant another year. We were 6 months on Hilo and 6 months on Oahu, flying different kinds of missions, flying night flying, dive bombing, and we do joint deals with the fleet. And finally, a year later, we get the word that we're going to board the USS Intrepid. So we get in our planes, and we find the ship is like 150 miles off of Oahu, and we all land aboard, and that's, from then on, we're going to be part of the ship's company. There's already 36 fighters on board, and there's a torpedo group on board, and then dive bombers, so we're a complete unit. And now we're all ready to go to join the big fleet. Now this is when the fleet really, before that, was a kind of a hit and run deal, but now we're fully expanded. We got more carriers than they know what to do with. So 19 days later, we had our first mission, which was kind of a farce, but it was a mission. It was over this little island, and we had to bomb a bauxite mine. Well, first of all, I didn't know what the heck bauxite was, so I had to look it up in the dictionary and found out this is what they make aluminum out of. And everybody drops 500-pound bombs on this poor little mine. It was on this island. It was about half the size of Vashon. And then we went back, and everybody was experiencing about the anti-aircraft fire that was coming up, and it wasn't an anti-aircraft fire, it was our own. When we go in there, we were shooting our 50s by the tracers would bounce off of rocks and come up, and they looked like somebody was shooting back. So we had a great time on that. So it was soon after that we got to our first invasion. There was a little island called Angora, and the island itself was probably half the size of Vashon Island, and it was completely rimmed by warships. And they had the big invasions there. First of all, I was seeing about 10,000 Marines went on their little boats, and they made a beach landing, and they got stopped on this beach, and they called for our support, and they would mark with phosphorus bombs where they wanted us to bomb, because it was so tight. And this is the first time they really found out what integrity these Japanese had on these islands, because we had very poor information. So we bombed that island for a week. Each day we'd go out, we'd circle above till a guy below would say, so-and-so, I want you to bomb grid number so-and-so. We'd look on our maps, we'd call back, and we'd dive down. Of course, nobody would shoot back at us because they were so busy down below fighting about it. Then we get the okay, like, that was a good attack. He was right on the target. Then we'd pull off and go back home. And this went on for about 2 weeks. Then soon, we got orders then to leave there and go to the Philippines. We thought, gee, Philippines, that was like, must be 300 or 400 miles from there. So we steam off and away we go. And of course, people don't realize that these carriers can really zip through the water. I mean, they can do 35 miles an hour, and it's hard to believe, but they were so fast that the destroyers had a heck of a time keeping up with them. But this was the big punch that we had so much speed. And we went up to the Philippines and went on the big island of Mindanao, and we had different maps showing the airfields of the city of Davao, and said first thing to do is to go in and destroy the airport. Well, we had pictures of the airport as a small little job, and went up there, and here this field was loaded with aircraft. We just happened to catch them on the ground. We dropped bombs, bombed the place, we bombed the hangars, and then the fighters waited for the Zeros down below to take off. They wait for them to take off. If they get airborne, then they'd shoot them down at the end of the field. So one guy came back. He had five planes to his credit. The first day he'd ever seen a Japanese aircraft. But this shows you what war is like. It's so a happen chance. And they told us that if we went down, not to land on Mindanao, not to go to Zamboanga, because there's some people who lived on that island that hated Japanese. They hated everybody, and the most people they hated was the Americans. And they said that, they were headhunters. So we'd always look over that island and say, well, if I get shot down, I'm sure going to go back to Mindanao. So then we went back the ship, and then the next day they said, well, you're going to be carrying messages to the city of Davao and tell them we're going to burn the city down. So there was 36 bombers and 12 torpedoes and about 25 fighters. And we went over just about at dusk, and we dropped incendiary bombs. The city was probably the size of Tacoma, and it completely burned it down. I mean, it was just one raging thing. It just seemed like it would be impossible for anybody to escape. Anyway, we went back to the ship and landed, and so they said, now we're going to go back to your little island that you were used to bombing on. And he says, and so we went back. This is 2 weeks that progressed, and the Marines had not advanced 1 inch from where they were still on the beach. So this is when they first started using, if I forget the term now, but it's a jelly type napalm, and we have 126-gallon belly tanks, which the fighter planes would use, and they fill it with napalm, and they put an instantaneous fuse, so with a jar of the thing, it would blow up. And there was 6 of us they sent out, and we went out and they bombed this one mountain. And I was number 6 to go on the thing, and I saw the things hit, but they weren't blowing up. And I dropped mine by happen. It was the last one, and it caught on fire. And the whole mountain looked just like it was like a volcano, because all this stuff was running down. And boy, the Marines, they thought that was great. You know, this is the first time we'd ever seen this napalm. You know, that was, well, we was a little worried about this stuff, because you know, it's not exactly the safest stuff in the world, because and you had an instantaneous fuse, which meant a jar would send it off, or it wouldn't send it off. It was very unpopular, but we certainly learned how to use it, and it became a good weapon. Then later on, they said, well, now this is what we're going to do, is we're going to give you a package bomb on each wing. And it says, well, scratch our head, what is a package bomb? Well, it's five machine guns on each bomb, and there's hung from your wings. So I got 10 machine guns and 2 20-millimeter cannons, and each plane is fixed with this. And the machine guns are 50 caliber, and they are set up so that the only way for them to be safe is just to run out of ammunition. It's not like the cannon. You can put the cannon on safe. You won't have to worry about it. But anyway, went out there and went on this island, and they told us where to go. I never saw so much land going up. And when the guys are coming down, and there was probably 15 of us, you know, all coming down together and then firing all these things. And the guys down below said, man, that was wonderful. But we understood that the Japanese just went into their caves, and as soon as we flew by, why, they came back out again. So this is the way war went on. It just kept going on, you know. We thought, well, this is a dull life, you know. Hadn't seen any kind of Japanese or any type of plane. So he says, now we're going to go back up to Leyte. Where's that? Well, that's up in the main part of the Philippines. This is where their proposed landing is going to be. Where MacArthur comes back, he's going to land at Leyte. So we said, well, whatever MacArthur wants, I guess we'll have to go. But went up there, and we saw a lot of Japanese planes. I mean, guys come back. We had Japanese that we attacked by 5, 6, 7, or 10, 12 of them that would come in on our, and we then found out what the Jap Zero was like. See those guys coming in, zipping in at about a low altitude, would be at 500 feet, and flip over on their back and do a split S, which pulled out. You know, if an F-6F tried that way, he'd be 600 feet underground. They were very maneuverable, but they were also very, very vulnerable to any kind of bullets, because they just fly apart. They were, you know, become very incendiary and would blow up on a moment's notice. In fact, we had one of them that went into a loop, started on the top of the loop, and there was a F6F right behind him, and he got to the top of the loop while the guy bails out, and the guy floats away, and the plane starts back down, and the F6F pilot, he snap rolled out and came back around, and then he fired and he shot down the plane, but there was nobody in it. The pilot was already out. So that was our first kill that we had seen, you know. Of course, by then the gunners had, you know, they didn't get a chance because we didn't close enough to get to them. But after that, we went to different, of course, the Philippines. It's just tremendous amount of islands that are involved in that thing. They talk the Philippines. Every inch of ground out there, there was some kind of a little round piece of ground, and we used to fly over 1,000 of these islands, and we found one place that had 4 great big warships full of troops, and here was 8 of us, and we were all fully loaded with bombs. They weren't armor piercing, but they were. So the skipper said we got up to 15,000 feet, rolled over and dove on the things, and the targets were so neat that all of us got so excited that we all missed. I mean, here was 8 planes, 4 big ships, and they're all full of Japanese troops, and we missed. Except one got a near miss, and half of the concussion blew plates out of the ship, started to sink, and it's made a whirl around and headed for the beach. So the skipper says, well, what else are we going to do? The only thing we got left is our 20s. So he divided us up, and each 4 planes would take a ship, and we dove on it, and we sunk all of those troop transports with 20mm cannon, which we didn't realize what a potent weapon it was until that day we used it. So anyway, this is, you know, how war goes. It's, you know, one day it's dull, and the next day there's so much stuff going on that you can't believe. So we go around to Leyte and find more airports, find different kind of troop transports, and then they said, well, now we want you to go up to Manila. And so we all, the 2 ships, our group was Task Group 38.2, took off and went up to Corregidor. So there we saw actually where the war started, and the harbor was just full of ships, Japanese ships. And it said each one of us took a ship of our own and dove on the thing and dropped a bomb, and each of us got hits on ships because they weren't moving. They were just stationary targets. And that was a real field day, you know. We came back, and one of the planes got a Jap Zero. The gunners, the Zero was trying to sneak up on on behind us, and this gunner on one of the SB-2Cs fired and knocked this guy down. That's the first time our planes had ever got a Jap Zero. Yeah. So the gunners felt real good because they're sitting back there, champing at the bit. You know, haven't fired their 30s in 2 years. You know. So anyway, to make a long story short, we progressed around different areas in Corregidor and up north, and then we bombed Clark Field, which is the big airfield there, which the Japanese had improved by about 90% of what pictures we had. And just to tell you how funny things are in this war, we had, after I got through with the bombing the airfield, I was flying out to this mountain. I forget the name of it, but it's the one that just exploded not too long ago. It had a volcano right there in Manila. And it's a little mountain that kind of just pokes his nose right out of the flat ground, and here's this peak comes up. And we used to use that as a way to go out and rendezvous. That was our rendezvous point after we got finished with Clark Field. We dove that day from about 15,000, and I pushed opened my flaps, but they wouldn't open. So I went straight down without flaps, and sitting in at about 300 miles an hour. I hit about 450 miles an hour, and pulls out, and I'm so far ahead of everybody. And when I went out across this field, my gunner says, well, there's a whole field down there that's full of Jap Bettys, which is a twin-engine bomber. Well, the funny part of it is my gunner cheated because he was colorblind. And he cheated in order to get in, but this camouflage, he could see right through it. I looked down there and all I could see was houses and streets. So he said, well, look over the left side, and he says, right straight down there, you can see these streets running there in parallel. And he says, they all look real nice and straight. And yeah, he says, well, that's not a town, that's an airfield. And he says, it's full of Bettys. So I called, by then Beetle was behind me, and I said, Beetle, I said, I'm going to make a run down through this thing. There's a whole Jap field of Bettys down below. And I says, and if I get any of them, why, then you'll know where they are. So I made a run there, and I just walked the cannon all the way through the thing, and all of a sudden these flames started bursting up, and Beetle says, oh boy, now I see where it is, because you can see the netting that they had up there. It started to burn off and exposed the thing. So we flew around there at 1,500 feet, and the gunners were firing to give them a chance. So we flew around. Finally, there were so many of them, and I called in for a group of F6Fs if there was any around. There was fires over in this area, and there's a whole field of Bettys, and we couldn't get them all. We didn't have enough ammunition. So they said, well, we'll come over. And so there was about 8 F6Fs, and they made a run through there. And the very last guy that made a run through, now the F6Fs was probably doing about 300 or 400 miles an hour going through that thing. They picked him off, and this whole field, by then, they got to their guns, and here we were flying at 1,500 feet. We didn't even know that they had guns down there. So we got back to the ready room, and I said to Beetle, I said, well, that's no more of that going around and chasing and looking for, targets of opportunity. I said, that's for the birds, because they could have picked us off with a rifle, because we were flying around running about 140 miles an hour, looking down at this airfield. What a nice area, and watch these planes burn. But then we see one of our own aircraft get knocked down. Anyway, well, we used to go out on what we called extra deals. Go out. We used to look for trains. That was Beetle and my favorite, was finding trains. Trains was easy to find because you could always see smoke anywhere, on tracks. But we'd go after the troop trains and stuff. Anyway, from then on we went back to Manila, and we worked over the areas, and finally they said, well, now it's about time that the invasion is coming, and so we're going to be an advanced deal. We're going to send you guys up to Formosa, which is quite a ways up north, closer to Japan, and we were kind of a diversionary force, catch anything coming down to stop when the invasion came on in Leyte. So we go up to Formosa, and the first day we go in there was 12 planes, and there was 8 of us, 9. There was 10 planes got through the thing, and one plane got shot down. And it was the first time we'd ever seen one of the guys get shot down, diving straight down. And we figured out that they must have had radar, because radar was the only thing you could set a fuse fast enough to catch you going straight down. So next day we went, they had a material made out of aluminum strips, and you throw that out, and it would fuzz up the radar, and they couldn't get a good target. So they said they just put out handfuls of it, and there was 12 planes, and each of the planes, guy was grabbing both hands, and one guy threw out a whole bale. I mean, gee, we came back. I had a bunch of that stuff in my air cooler. The air was so full of it, and it stopped him all right. So we figured, well, we went a little farther advanced, but go to this big city of Davao, or not Davao, what was the name of that place? Anyway, my section leader said, you know, that we'd have to, when we pulled out, we were going to pull out and go north, and then we would circle the city and then go on out, and then we'd catch the rest of the group. We was going to diversionary go out over this other city and see if any targets over there. But anyway, in the interim, it was myself, MG was in the second plane, and then Larson was our section leader. There was the three of us, and anyway, he got hit going down, and the gunner was knocked out, and he had trouble with these wing flaps, and it had punctures in these tanks, and he also got hit by a small arms that had gone through his cockpit and into the armor plate and splintered off onto his shoulder, so he was wounded. So when I come on him, he was flying straight and level, but going like a bomb, and it's awful hard to catch anybody when they're going straight ahead. So I firewalled my thing as far as I could go and then gave it water injection so it wouldn't blow the cylinders up, and finally caught him. And just as I got up there was a plane, Zero was sitting on his lap and was firing into him, and I don't know, he put in like 27 holes into his wings. And he didn't see me coming, and so I had to go down and come up under him because I didn't want to fire down, because I'd fired, I hit Larson, and I hit him in the tail and blew his tail completely off, which was he was as surprised as I was. Well, anyway, there was 4 of them. That was 3 left. So MG and I said, well, let's go into what we call a tactical deal where both of us would sit and fly tight formation. And each time the plane would come in, it was a time we'd get into range of firing where we'd turn into him. And when we turn into him, it'd make him turn that much sharper. Anyway, the second time we came in, here's the plane wiggles, and we can tell when he's going to come in, because they had at one time 2 on each side, and finally the guy wiggled and make it wear in. And as soon as we started to turn, we could see the sparkle. He knew that he was firing then, and he was getting tighter and tighter, and he couldn't get him tight enough. And I said to the gunner, next time he comes through, I says, he's going to come up on the other side, catch him on that other side, because then by then his speed is gone, and he just kind of sat up there and all by himself, and the gunner caught him and put in 1,200 rounds in that Zero step. He got right from the cowling all the way through. I mean, he just practically tore the airplane apart. The guy bailed out, but I don't think he was in very good shape. But let me make a long story short, my gunner got a distinguished flying cross for that, because that was he was one of the first ones to get a Jap Zero, which was, gunners were real eager, because that's an awful boring job to have some guy out in front there dive bombing, and you have to sit back there. So by then, I'd taken one out. The gunner had taken one out, so there's only 2 left, and they were discouraged. They decided they better not fool around with those terrific bombers. So I went up next to Larson, and he was flying at about 150 feet off of the water. And I asked him to come up and pointed up, and he shook his head. He didn't want to. So I said to my gunner, I said, well, I'm going to go up, and then we'll take a fix and find out where the ships are, because by then we'd gone around different places. I didn't know where we were. We'd flown all over. and we had a radio beacon, and the gunner took a shot on the thing. We had to make a 120-degree correction. I nodded and I was going to lead, and Larson's okay, because I knew Larson was all right, but his gunner was draped over his gun rail. I figured he was dead, so, and I could see that all his instruments was all blown apart and everything. So we made a correction, and we got into the ship, and I called in and told him that we had one guy that was planning to bring him in at any cost, because I don't think he can make another turn. The pilot's wounded and the gunner's dead. So, and to make a long story short, Larson made it on the first pass, so the MG and I both landed later. Well, it turned out to be that the gunner wasn't dead, but he was so close to it that he had another 10 minutes he would have been dead because of bleeding to death. Well, one of the things, of course, is the higher up you go, the more you'll bleed. So that's one reason why Larson stayed down low. And the other reason is that he said if he passed out, he said he was going to feel like he was going to pass out, he was going to cut the gun, and he just let the plane go into the water from a lower altitude. He figured maybe he might come out of it. The funny part of it is that Larson was one of I flew with him on a navigation hop one time, and he didn't think I was too much of a navigation pilot, and he says, I sure wouldn't want you to lead me anywhere when in the war. Of course, he'd been out there one time before. This is his second trip out. Well, to make a long story short, Larson was, wherever I was, or wherever Larson was, he'd jump up and say, this is the guy that saved my ass, no matter where he was. And I guess he was pretty, he always wanted to buy me drinks and everything, because I was his friend for life from then on.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Anyway, I left, we were in Formosa. I should explain that Formosa later on was known as Taiwan, which now is known as Taiwan. We were actually only 70 miles from the mainland of China, so we were issued jackets that had the American flag on the sleeve, and in this sleeve there was enough Chinese money to last us 3 months over in China. If we got shot down. A couple of guys I think made it to China. We're not sure. We never did hear from them because they never showed up in Formosa. One of my roommates, a real close friend of mine, got shot down, and later on his brother joined our squadron, and his brother got the information. He even found out where he was shot down in Formosa, and he sent me a paper that was done by American in the Army, and they go over and they research all of these areas where planes have gone down, searching for people that were lost in World War II, because there are many, many, many thousands that they never found the bodies. Just like in Vietnam, it's not unheard of. Vietnam, this missing persons was that they had them in Russian prison camps and different places, but some of those areas are so remote that it's practically impossible to find them. So after the experience with the 4 zeros, we headed back for the ship and landed, and the next day we were told to go back to we were going to go back to Leyte, because that's the second day of the invasion, and go back there and support the invasion. MacArthur was going to land and these troops landed at Formosa, or at, at Leyte. So we speeds back, which took us about a week to get back there. And by then, the troops had already secured Leyte. In fact, MacArthur had already made his famous landing. We got to see the newsreels of it, which we thought was a real laugh, you know. But this is the second time he marched into land there, you know. He came out of a boat and then he walked in on the water and very ceremoniously took over Leyte. He says, "I shall return," and he finally did. Anyway, then it just I had a few missions around Leyte, and one day I came home on getting ready to land on the ship, and I said to Gunner, I said, "Well, they must be having firing practice. I see the gunners on board our ship are firing. We could see anti-aircraft going off." Excuse me. And when I went to land, I felt this flame on the side of my face and looked over, and the whole left side of the ship is on fire. And what had happened is that a Japanese plane had made a run on the ship, and this is the first time that they really initiated what they call a kamikaze. And this kamikaze, they made a run, and the gunners were on that side that manned it. There was 40 20-millimeter cannons, and they were the black stewards manned this thing, and it was the guy that run the thing was an Indian, and that was his crew. And the guys kept firing even though they knew that they were going to be hit by this plane. So I started up, and I couldn't go because I was hooked up on the hook, and a guy come out and disengaged the hook, and then I finally pulled forward, and guys were laying all around the deck, and I kind of taxied around and folded my wings, and finally some guy come out and he put me into a slot and told me to cut the engine. I cut the engine, we got out. Of course, I got called by the captain and said that, you know, he asked me what a wonderful job I'd done, you know, had gone ahead without anybody telling me what to do. It took my plane out of the fire that was down there by the end of the ship. And of course, I didn't really know what was going on. I had an idea when I saw that that ship was on fire, that something had, you know, I thought maybe one of our own planes had hit and burned or something. So I was ignorant of what was going on, but they then knew that they really meant, because they were talking about these kamikazes, and they noticed a couple of them had made feints where they pointed down towards the ship. But of course, most of them never made it because they get shot out of the air before they even got out of the area. Then the Japan announced that they were going to send out fleets of these kamikazes, and some of those poor guys only had 20 hours in the aircraft. Some of them, you know, that's all they knew how to take off. They didn't know really how to land. Send them out there and die for their country, which is, I blame Japan and the big shots of Japan for, you know, initiating such a deal. Of course, we knew about backup bombs, which are bombs carried underneath the Jap Betty, and this guy would be inside of the thing, and he would guide the bomb. And we had, of course, those planes would usually get shot down before they get near any ship. They had out and sent out night fighters at night and go out and vector them out to these by radar. And of course, these guys flying in the airplane, they didn't know anything about what was going on, because all they knew was there was a hunt for a ship. And then all of a sudden here an airplane would shoot them out of the sky. Didn't even know there was anyone near there. So it was a kind of a cat and mouse thing there. We did quite a few different sorties around. We found some, one day they found a lifeboat with about 20 guys in it. It was off of some freighter that said he was going along, and all of a sudden one of our submarines out there and torpedoed them, and they were lucky they got out of the thing. In fact, every day that we went out, there was a different code that we'd call in, and the code was usually somebody in the newspaper, and a funny, like Superman or Mr. Jiggs or Mr. Hoople, or they had different names. That was for the station where the submarines were already out there and knew where we were, and if the guys that got, run out of gas and they give their location, they get picked up by our own subs. We heard one night where the submarine was, and it was an afternoon, and he was in Tokyo Harbor, and gave us the scores of they were having a ball game. And we thought we were having a tough deal. And here is a submarine that had followed another freighter and followed it into the harbor up there in Tokyo. Those guys were just absolutely fearless. Actually, we were more fearless than you realize because we had such poor equipment. Our torpedoes were just terrible. I went out one day on a patrol with a torpedo plane and myself. We covered a certain area, and we ran across the two-stack freighter, and I said, well, I'll go up above and make a dive bombing run on, and you can make a run on him with a torpedo. So everything went fine, and I dropped my bomb, got a hit, and the torpedo came right up to the ship. Then I made a U-turn and came back and went back to the beach and blew up. This is where you had to, you couldn't go over 120 knots. The Japanese used to come in there at 400 miles an hour and drop one of those torpedoes, and they would never miss, Just had terrible torpedoes. They finally got them straightened out, but they talked about, about the superior equipment of the United States. Well, it wasn't always superior. We had a lot of things that weren't, and one of them was torpedoes. So by then, things got kind of nasty. Japan was going to have to make a move, and it was to bring their fleet down there and try to get everybody out of the Philippine area and have the big battle of the big battleships. And there was always waiting for the group coming down from the north. And we're around in the Philippine area at that time. And we had a fellow on board the ship named Max Adams, and he was the first one to discover the Japanese fleet coming down, which, included two large battleships and cruisers and dozens of cruisers and battleships and everything. So the next day, there was only two ships that were in that area at that time. The others were getting provisioned, and we had already provisioned. So they said, well, you're going to have to take off and bomb the Jap fleet at night. And I remember the date. It was October 23rd, because that's my birthday, and I had written a deal, and I found out what they meant by that we were expendable, because we knew that there would be only a one-way hop. For us to go out there and bomb a battleship with our radar that we had on, and the battleships had so much better than they'd probably shoot us out of the air before we even got near them. We wouldn't know that we were near them, but it was kind of a tragedy. So anyway, to make a short story long way, finally they said, well, they didn't have the right position, and that we'd go the very first thing in the morning. So We had breakfast at 4 o'clock, and we had steak and eggs. Boy, I'll tell you, the steak was, we'd been living off of worst rations. I don't know where they got these steaks from. They must have saved them. We got on board, and then we all took off and started for the fleet. And Max got the position on the exact fleet, and we knew where they were. So we took off and went for it. They were about 180 miles from where we were. So we carried big belly tanks. We got near them, we all dropped our belly tanks. And of course I flew off of a section leader. And finally the guy said, well, there's the fleet. And so then I looked down, and there was more surface craft than there were airplanes in the air. So the leader says, well, I'm going to go for the battleships, and whatever you guys want to do, go for a ship, but stay right on it. So battleships were the largest ones down there, so we were the second. There was 6 went ahead of us, and then there were the next 3 to go. And we're in the dive, and I looked down, and here's this huge battleship, and I thought, gosh, almighty, we made a mistake. We're diving on the Iowa or on New Jersey, because it had this pinch bow. It looked exactly like an American ship. But then I saw the meatball flag on it. I knew it was Japanese. So I dropped my bomb and pulled out, and each ship fired their own aircraft, and each ship had their own color, so the air was just full of different bursts of color. Then the guys were shooting these phosphorus bombs, which when they exploded, they sent out spirals of, and this stuff would get on the plane, would eat a hole right through the thing. We hoped that we wouldn't get any of that in the cockpit. Anyway, I pulled out, and everything went fine, and didn't get hit. Joined up on a group, and heck, there was all the guys had made it back except MG, and he had a small hole in one of the cylinders, and the cylinder was missing and kind of jerky. You could see the cowling twist, but he made it all the way back and all landed. Of course, then we told him what we'd. And the guy asked him, well, what I hit, and I said, well, I hit the forward turret with a 1,000-pound armor piercing, and he says, well, what do you, the damage you did? And I said, well, my gunner said all it did was dent it. And he said, well, what ship was it? And I said, well, I don't know, but I said, it had a huge pinch bow on the thing. And he says, well, did it look like this? And it had a, yeah, yeah, exactly like that. And it looks just like the Iowa, New Jersey. And he says, well, that's the Musashi. And he said the Yamamoto, there was 2 of them. He says, they're not even supposed to be out. They're supposed to be still in the shipyards in Japan. They're not. I said, well, they're out now. Well, as it happened, the Musashis, what we went after, it got crippled up and knocked out most of the radar. And the same fleet went after a small group of down south in Subic Bay, and that's where they went after those small carriers. And I had a friend who was on a small carrier, and he says these big ships would fire these huge guns, would fire these shells the size of a Volkswagen Beetle and go right straight through the ship before it would explode. It was their radar was all off, which we had knocked out, which is it saved them. And then during the night, a submarine got in there. Of course, those submarines are all, nobody knew where they were all the time. And one of them got in there and sunk one of the big ships. And when I was in my dive going down, I was looking through my scope and watching the ship as it was twisting and turning. And I saw a torpedo making a mark for a WWII class cruiser, and one of the guys had overshot this ship that I was trying to bomb, and hit this WWII class cruiser right midships, and the thing looked like it just like sucked water for about a half a mile. And when the explosion is all over with, there wasn't any ship left. There was nothing there. I mean, there was probably 3,000 men died instantly right there. It just, it had probably hit a magazine. And of course, that was the end of that ship. But the big battleships, they were hit by torpedoes, but they had these large bubbles on the side that they took hits. And it slowed them down a little bit, but the only time it stopped, one of them got hit in the rudder, so it didn't have all complete steering, and later on the submarines got that ship, and it was sunk with all hands on board. It was a terrific loss of life. Well, we heard is what had happened, that the carriers went on one side of the Philippine Islands, and battleships and cruisers went on the other side. And so the next day we have to go out and go after the carriers. So we thought, well, anyway, we're going to have a lot of help, because by then all the guys had got refueled, all the ships were back in place, and so the next day we were at 20,000 feet, and we waited for almost an hour before we could go in and bomb. We had to wait our turn to bomb the ships. That's how many aircraft we. And we were getting madder and madder, because we could see they had 4 carriers, and we saw 2 of them were sinking. There was only 2 left, and by the time we got there, the 2 that we were going after were on fire, already been hit. So when we got through, the other 2 was sunk. So that was the end of the carriers. But a carrier is really neat to hit, because it's flat. It's like a big piece of ground, you know. And this one here had a huge design on it, like a big eye with the eye was deals shooting out on the deck. It was like shooting a bullseye, you know, for a target. I remember I planted that. I practically put the bomb exactly where I wanted it, and it was down. And when I pulled up, and the 2 guys behind us, and about 10 minutes later, why the ship had sunk. And that's a large carrier. So anyway, went back to the ship. We was all happy, and we all become heroes, because you're a hero when you get to bomb the Jap Navy. And so from then on said, well, this is all going to be downhill, you know, there's going to be nothing left. Well, then we thought it was bad when they had kamikazes, and every night they'd have 40 and 50 and 60 and 100 planes that come in at night, seeking out our ships to bomb them at night, you know, with these kamikazes. It was, you know, pretty bum. Well, I developed a heck of a cold. Next day I was supposed to go out on a hop, and anyway, I went to the doc to see if I get my ears blown out or something. He said, well, you can't go up. He says, you'll rupture your eardrums, you know, going through the different, from 20,000 feet down to this 1,500 feet is pretty fast. We used to go to about 350 knots, and you know discomfort you can get in an airplane when you go at different altitudes. So I stayed below and didn't go on the hop. So I went down, and at about 9 o'clock I played bridge with a bunch of guys down in the wardroom. And anyway, I just learned how to play bridge, and I was bidding a small what is it they call them? Anyway, small slam. And there was a kind of a bumps, and you could hear the 5 inches firing off, because it was really shaking the ship. The guy said, well, I suppose they're going after another kamikaze. And we said, yeah. Pretty soon the ventilator, this real deep black smoke come out of this ventilator. The guy said, well, boy, something must be on fire, because that ventilator is putting smoke into this room. So we each took our napkin out and dipped it in, we had tea, and dipped it in the tea and wrapped it around there, because it was getting pretty black. Guy came in with a helmet and a life jacket and on, and he says, the forward magazine's on fire. And of course, I said to one of the black stewards, where's the forward magazine? He says, sir, we're on top of that forward magazine. I said, well, I made a race for the door. I beat him to the door. We got outside, and then we realized our ship had got hit, and this bumps that we heard was the two kamikazes that hit us. The ship was on fire from one end to the other.
Was this the Intrepid?
Yeah, and the old USS Intrepid, and I can never remember going through these different hatchways. The ship, of course, had been secured for battle, and as you go forward, why you'd have these different compartments. You'd have to spin the wheel, open the door, go through, then close it. I went back, go back to my room, see if there was anything there. If the ship got hit back in the back part of the thing, so I finally made it back there. Everything was fine, and then I went outside. The guy come up and he says, well, could you give us some help up above? So it was just terrible, all these guys that burned to death. There's one side of that ship where they had all these black stewards. There was 40 of them all that had been burned by the flames of this plane. There's two of them came in. One came in at a steep angle, and he went down, and his bomb let loose, and it hit below on the armor deck, which is next deck down, and then it blew. Then it put holes in all the ventilating systems, and then there was a couple planes down and set them on fire. The other one was at a shallower angle, and they went through, and the bomb proceeded to go through about 3 ready rooms. Finally got down by the forward part of the ship, and it blew, and it knocked out an elevator, and one elevator was already gone, so the ship was on fire from one end to the other. So when I went outside there, I figured, gosh sakes, the next thing I ought to do is go get a life preserver. So I asked the guy, I said, where are the life preservers? He looked at me like, what are you doing up here without one? Well, of course, we're not in ship's company. We flew airplanes out. He said, well, I'm sorry, sir. He says, they're over here, so I got a life preserver, and went up and I helped him clean out a couple places using, we used I try to think, a gurney type thing, and pick up these dead ones. Anyway, finally the ship's own sprinkling system finally put the fire out, because at one time there was a couple ships came in close and used their own water, were shooting on, and they were ordered to be moved away because they thought the ship were going to be blowing up, and then it would probably take that ship too. So we were just going to sit out there, and because we carry a tremendous amount of gasoline and fuel, because we used to fuel every 3 weeks, and every day or every 2 days we would fuel a destroyer, and we had carried more ammunition than an ammunition ship, and I actually carried more fuel. And I had one guy in the Navy, he was a transport man. He doubted whether we carried more fuel than one of those tankers, but we get every 3 weeks we get a load of fuel from one of those big tankers. This was a secret weapon because the tankers at that time, they were capable of doing, say, 18, 20 knots, and they would come up alongside, and we would hook onto us, and we would not even stop, just keep going and take on board thousands of gallons of fuel that we have to have for not only to run the ship, but also for fuel for the aircraft, because there was a lot of aircraft on board one of those carriers. Basically, there was about 3,500 people on board the ship. We had different guys who represented the New York Times and the Baltimore Sun, and it's about 4 papers. And these guys are sending reports, for the deal. And of course, the biggest laugh would be was when we'd get a New York reporter would send in that MacArthur's planes had bombed so-and-so. Well, MacArthur's planes at that time, they weren't on that Leyte yet because there wasn't any place for them to land. The nearest would be Australia, and of course they would maybe make it up halfway, but you know, that was one of the political things that went on out there. MacArthur got a lot of credit for it, and he wasn't even near the place. So, anyway, that was, the ship got hit, and so we went back to Hawaii, to Oahu. The damage is so bad, they said, well, the skipper announced, he says, man, he says, I hate to tell you this, but he says, the ship has been hit so bad, we're going to have to go back to Alameda. He had a little chuckle in his voice. So I meant we were going home. So we took off and made it back to Alameda in 3.5 days. It didn't slow the ship down any because that baby could go even with only 3 props. He could do at least 33 knots. It's hard to believe, but and now when you're talking about knots, we were talking about these big battleships, the Iowa and New Jersey. When we were informed on about the Jap fleet coming in, the New Jersey was alongside over there, so it was close enough that we could see the wake coming off the thing. And they said they were going to go at flank speed, and they literally, the back end of this huge ship went down kind of like a racing boat, and all of a sudden it just took off. And it went off so fast that it left the destroyers, and the destroyers could do 35 knots. Somebody said, do you know that those ships that do 45 knots, I don't doubt it, but 45 knots is a lot of speed. That's almost 50 miles an hour. To see one of those huge ships go that fast. Because, you know, they're real long, but then you get alongside them, and they're just huge because they got these huge blisters on each side, and you can't figure that they could ever push that much weight through. But I know that our ship was, when we get up to 33 knots, so we go out and look at the bow, and the water would come up, about 60 feet. It'd come up like this in a big deal and then break over, and just like there was a knife cutting through this. It was really pretty to see those things off. But ours wouldn't go quite that fast because on the preceding, before we got on board ship, a truck, it took a torpedo, and the concussion of the torpedo had one of the shafts bent so that they only run on three props. The only time they turn the 4th prop in is if we go faster than 33 knots, it'd turn in that 4th prop, and then you knew because you could stand under the fantail that it would vibrate real bad. But it was good enough that I think that was one reason why we went back, because they wanted to get that other prop repaired. The props are so long on those things that they, when you're on standing anchored, they keep the prop turning all the time, because if they don't turn it, just the weight of the shaft itself will go out of line, so they always keep the thing slowly turning. That's all 4 of the props. There's 2 on each side. One of them was vibrating so bad is the fact that it had a airplane. One of the airplanes didn't make it, and it got caught up in the prop and got wrapped around. So they was going to have to take it to dry dock. So anyway, here we got home on December 22nd. And I think I called Marilyn up on the 23rd, said I was going to be home on 24th, and I flew from San Diego to Seattle. Alameda. Oh yeah, it was from Alameda is where I get it. It was Oakland. And that day it was 6.5 hours. It's hard to believe, and that was flying they had DC-3s, all completely covered so you couldn't look out. Got in and got home and met my wife at People's Store. And we clinched down there, much of my mother-in-law's chagrin. She went around and apologized. She said, well, he's been gone for 2 years. And so I said, well, when are we going to get married? She said, right away. And if I had 30 days leave and I was married in, what, 20 days?
30th, well, it would have been 6 days. No, 10 days.
10 days, anyway.
7 days.
So that was in December of 44. And we married, and then I reported then Seattle to reform a new squadron. By then, of course, I had more experience, and I was going to be a division leader instead of one of those guys that had to, like we were ensign before we got it, had to follow everybody. I was going to be a leader from then on with war experience. So, which I found out wasn't all it was cracked up to be either. And we went from Seattle, and then we went to Astoria, Oregon. And we opened an airfield down there. The first Navy bought this, was their city airport, and they put all the beautiful towers in and did all the runways. And, well, it's still used today. It's a nice airport. Navy did a lot of work like that. So Army did too, went to different places that these little small towns didn't have big enough airports. But we were there for at least 3 months. It was so bad that we weren't getting enough flying hours in because the weather was so terrible. You know, there'd be days and we wouldn't fly. And then finally went down to San Diego. And of course down there it was nice weather, we get to fly. Then we got different airplanes. Big rumor is going to go by and say we're going to get an F-9Fs instead of the bomber we were going to have, but it never fell. It kind of fell through. Then he sent us to rocket training in the desert. We were first learning how to fire rockets. This is when they put rockets on the wings, and we could carry 20 rockets, and they were equivalent to a 5-inch shell. And we went to the desert. Marilyn then learned how to be a Navy wife. We went to the desert with 120 degrees of weather. But we had a good time. And got through rocket training, went back to San Diego, and then he said, you know, war was over, and anybody that had points to get out. Well, I had so many points that I think I was about 2 days. War was over. I was on the road heading back for Seattle. That's where I joined, was in Seattle. Go back there to collect my $500 a year, which they didn't know about. So I told one of the lieutenant commanders. I said, "Well, you know, the reason I joined here in Seattle is that the Navy is the fact they were going to pay a commission that could pay $500 a year for anybody that joined the Navy." And he said, "Well, I heard about that." So he come back and he says, "You're right." He says, "I got it right here on the information." He says, "So you got about $2,000 coming," which was nice, along with the severance pay. It wasn't too long, you know, that the things all broke up. A lot of guys stayed in. There was quite a few of them. The fellows, when our squadron was reformed after we got back, some went to the east. Those that lived in the east went there, and those in the west went to the west. So our Squadron 18 then broke up. But we were really Squadron 18. Even after we broke up, we reformed. We still retained our squadron. The ones who went east were different. So that would be the that would be my war career. If there's any questions, go ahead and shoot.
When you went on the bombing run, you said it was on your birthday.
Mm-hmm.
How old were you? Had you just turned?
24.
What was your group called? And why?
We called the Sunday Punchers. And our squadron was VB-18, VB standing for bomber group, and 18 was a designate. And we said Sunday Punchers. The fact is that we never missed a Sunday on going on a bombing mission out on when we was in combat. So some of us didn't even get a chance to go to church. Most of us did go to church. There weren't very many people out there that didn't. It was a tough go.
What was it like in San Diego, Navy town, on the night that the war was over?
That was a beautiful, beautiful thing. I mean, I can remember the streets were full of people dancing, and it was hard to believe that the war was over. I mean, it was just, all I could think of was get home and start raising children.
How many missions did you end up flying?
I flew 21 missions. Most of us all got it, because we got shorted. We were supposed to be. We got hit in November. We got back. It was in December, and we weren't supposed to leave that area out there until April or March or April of the following year, because that by then we'd have probably around 40 missions. But our missions, I had more missions there, but missions actually mean we fly over enemy territory and have enemy contact. I did a lot of what we call anti-sub patrols, which we flew. And this was a protection deal. We fly to cover areas out in front of our group of ships, so that there weren't any submarines that would sneak in on us and come back to the ship. In fact, we had one of the guys that we'd lost so many pilots. We had 3 guys we picked up off of Jeep carriers that landed on board, and they've been on board this Jeep carrier for like 3 months. And this is the first time they'd flown, and one of the landing signal officer, we went out to see these guys come in, because we figured they were going to have a tough time, and this landing signal officer says, well, next time if that guy doesn't come down, I'm going to get my shotgun and shoot him down. Poor guy hadn't been on the carrier, but hadn't been able to, take off. They were just replacement pilots. Kind of a rough deal. And one of them, second mission, he went on a anti-sub patrol and got lost, and he was picked up like 11 days later, and he had lost, 35, 40 pounds. And the guy was kind of fat when he went on the deal. When he come back, he was nice and tan and real thin. The guy kept saying, well, you look a hell of a lot better than when you left the ship, which made him kind of mad. But anyway.
What percentage of your squadron did you lose?
Well, it was between 30 and 35%. Most of it, believe it or not, most of it wasn't in combat. Most of it was in operational. We lost about 48% in operational accidents. Almost half of the guys were killed in different things. We even had one guy that, it was a real cloudy day flying out of Alameda, which is right close to Oakland. And we did a field carrier landings, which we fly off the ground at about 200 feet and fly out a pattern, came off the ground, and then land on this so-called mark on the ground the size of a carrier, and that's where we learned how to, you know, keep our planes under control. But fog came in, we kept getting longer and longer and longer, and this one guy flew right through the Oakland Bay Bridge. The only thing came up was one tire, one wheel with a tire on it, and never did find him. But there was so many things that happened. One night a fella just all of a sudden just kind of slid out of the formation and just kept a gentle glide like he was gliding down, and finally he hit the ground. We'd flying at about 12,000 feet at night. Couldn't figure out, we must have fallen asleep, but they found out what had happened is that if you had the window cracked a certain deal, which you have your canopy and exhaust pipe, and he was bringing enough exhaust in that he could have had the exhaust probably sitting asleep, killed him. But you know, everybody kept yelling at him to. I mean, everybody who knew who it was. He was a full-blooded Indian. His name was Goodspeed.
When you were landed on carriers, you had a hook on the plane that attached to those cables.
Yeah,
That must have been real interesting trying to do that at night.
yeah. It's the most horrible experience I've ever had is flying in on a carrier at night. And the other day I was watching some guys on the jets, and they were talking about this night carrier landing, what a horrible thing it was. So it hasn't gotten any better even in the jets. See, in our case, like in the jet, when he hits the deck, and then he gives full power until he's engaged. Well, us, it wouldn't do any good to get full power, because if you get hooked on a cable, why that was it. Because you never did. Some of the guys would, you know, get airborne and they pour on the power because their hook wasn't engaged, and the plane would either break off to one side or the other. The planes we were flying had a tendency to left wing to drop. You would lose, you know, it would go off, and then of course you're 60 feet, the flight deck's 60 feet from the water. That is much room to recover.
Were there multiple cables? So if you missed the first
Yeah.
one, was there another one?
Yeah, we had about 5 cables. Each one got stiffer as you went up the line. First cable we got would stretch out, it was just like, you know, like a big rubber band. The second cable was, you know, a little more stubby, but boy, you get up number 4 cable, that baby would grab you and you wanted to have your head back on that cushion, or it was really slap you down in a hurry. You got so, you know, it was not bad landing because it was fairly automatic, but you still used to have to really sweat and strain, because in the case of the plane we had is they had cowl flaps that would open up, and of course that was right in the line of it. You'd look out to your side of your window and look down there to feel the cowl flaps. So right there would open up so that you couldn't see the landing signal officer, so you usually had to close the cowl flaps, and your visibility wasn't as good. Now, you see these jets, and they have this set out at the end of that point. There's no prop out in front. Everything is in back. They have a lot better visibility. But of course, they're landing at 120 miles an hour, where we're landing at 80, 75 or 80 knots. They're landing at 120.
You had a name for your plane, and where did it come from?
My plane was called Lucky Penny. The guy that was the plane captain, he was part of the crew of the USS Intrepid. His wife was named Penny, and he asked me if he could name it. I told him yeah, and so when they went out there, and here it was written on the side, Lucky Penny. I would maybe fly the thing maybe out of the 20 missions. I probably flew it 4 times. It just depends on. It depend on, you know, your assignment, what plane you got. You know, it didn't always get your own plane. Of course, when a gunner and I got our first aircraft, it was ours assigned, and were land-based. Well, we got out and we polished the thing all up. Got about 5 knots faster out of it. Because paint jobs on those are pretty crude. They're real rough. We polished it all down.
Did you ever make any landings, land landings, any of those islands that the Americans recaptured?
No, our group did. Our group landed on Leyte. It was after the ship was hit. They had to wait until they got an assignment for another ship, and they landed on, I believe it was the Hancock. The next day they flew out and landed on the Hancock, and then they were delivered over by boat to our ship, and they kept our planes because the replacement was about what they needed anyway. Then they all went on board our. That's when we were sent back to Alameda or sent back to first to Honolulu to get fixed up, because we have 3 elevators on the thing, and all 3 of them one was jammed, the other 2 had dropped clear to the bottom, so they weren't operable.
Didn't you say at one time that something about you threw your wings in? Everybody on the flight threw the wings?
That's when they told us we were going to take off at 6 o'clock in the evening and go fly, make contact with the, about 9 o'clock at night, make contact with the Japanese fleet and bomb them by radar, and then come back to the ship. Which meant we would, first of all, we wouldn't get back to the ship because we wouldn't have enough gasoline. Second of all, we wouldn't have enough. Anyway, that's when we found out that we were expendable.
But then they could interrupt me.
Okay.
Well, my assignment is to talk about what it was like on the home front, because that's where I was, and my husband and I had dated a long time before the war, and I saw his growing interest in aviation, and I didn't know whether to be pleased or not pleased. It was a pretty unusual field at that time. Not very many people were interested in doing that. And I was afraid for him, but I also thought it was pretty romantic and pretty exciting. He took me up one day in his little, was it a Piper Cub?
Mm-hmm.
And we waved at my mother down below, who was clenching her hands and worrying over the whole experience. And then as the war got closer and closer, we began to get more and more worried about him going in. I was in college, and so my life became defined by letters received and letters sent. I always wrote to him in green ink so that when he got a letter on board ship, the person handing out the letters would just yell out green ink, and he'd put his hand up and he'd know that was for me. We were engaged just before, became engaged just before he went overseas. And so life became a matter of waiting and waiting, not knowing how long anything was going to take. We heard stories about it may go on for 8, 9 years. And I thought, my goodness, I'm going to be an old lady by the time I get married. But fortunately, it didn't take that long. During the year that the first year we were married, very late in 1944, of course, the following early spring, President Roosevelt died, which was a shock to the nation, because I could hardly remember of having had any other president. He had been in office for so long. my big thrill at turning 21 was to get to go into a voting place and cast my vote for president. And I did vote for Franklin Roosevelt. We voted in a little grocery store, and we got in line and wended our way up and down the aisles, and finally the big moment came and I cast my vote, and that was pretty exciting for me. The beginning of a long life of moderate interest in politics, I guess you might say. Don was over there a long, long time, it seemed to me, and when he finally came back, I wasn't sure I would even remember what he looked like. But sure enough, I did recognize him, and but I was very glad when the war was over for him. After we were married, though, they received more training, as he was telling you about, and he was just beginning to get uneasy about being sent back out again in the summer of 45, when the atomic bomb was dropped, and we knew that the war was soon to be over, and we came home from San Diego and began a civilian life. He did follow up, though, with being in the reserves for quite a long time at Sandpoint Naval Air Station.
How'd you feel when he called to tell you he was coming home?
Well, I was pretty shocked. I had no idea that he would be home that soon. I was expecting him in March, and of course they did not want it known that his ship was hit by a kamikaze, because they didn't want the Japanese to understand how successful those kamikaze attacks were. And so I was not to say anything when I did find out why he was home earlier than expected. But that was pretty nice. During the war years, the college life was pretty tame. There were no young men around to speak of. College dances were pretty hard to scare up a date for, but those years did pass.
But you dated a CO.
Yes, for a while. It was strange, though. This young man was heart and soul a conscientious objector, could see no reason for ever going to war, and the Monday morning after the attack of Pearl Harbor, he enlisted, much to my amazement. He went into the service and became a pilot of a B-25 over Germany.
Did you find out much about like where he was going and things like that through letters and things, or did he wasn't allowed to tell you?
He was not allowed to tell us where he was. The name of his ship was stamped on money orders that he sent home for safekeeping, but no, we did not know. But I would keep reading about these Sunday punchers, and I didn't know that it was always his group. I thought, well, it might be one group one time and another group another, but it was always his group. So I'd been reading about him, never knowing that it was he.
Were your letters censored at all? Did anybody read your mail that went back and forth?
His letters were censored, weren't they?
Yep.
But
I was a censoring officer. I did my own.
But mine were not.
Did you cut holes out of your own letters?
No.
Oh, I can't say that. Cut.
It was interesting, though, because I had all the enlisted personnel, and I'd read their letters, to make sure that they didn't have. And this one guy had a gal who was a full-blooded Hawaiian. She's half Hawaiian, half Chinese, and then she had another girl back in Iowa. And he would send identical letters to each one of them.
Marilyn, besides the letters from Don, where did you get most of your information about what was going on?
Newspapers.
Newspapers?
And some from the radio, and then we had the Pathé News at the theaters. We always got a news broadcast.
Did you ever not want to know news for fear you'd hear something bad?
No, because when someone was lost, their families were notified right away, as near as they could. In in the case of a pilot, they would be pretty sure to know.
Missing
right
in
away.
action.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the differences that you saw during those years in terms of day-to-day life?
Day-to-day life, of course, grew into a sort of routine, but there were many, many things that we couldn't buy in the stores.
Uh-huh.
Lots of things were curtailed. Sugar was curtailed, and bananas were a big treat. We could only buy 3 pairs of shoes, leather shoes, a year. If you wanted to buy cloth shoes, you could get as many of those as you wanted. The problem with the shoes was that if you bought a pair of heels, the metal in the shank was very poor and it would usually break. And so you would be hobbling around on shoes that were kind of going like that under your foot. So things were of a poor quality, generally speaking, I think. After I graduated from college in June of '44, I went to work at the Tacoma shipyards in the payroll office, and I didn't make any ships, but I went out to pay the checks to the fellows who were cutting the patterns from the plans. They would have a plan, and then they would cut plans out of plywood, and then the metal itself was cut from the plywood patterns, and that's what they were doing there. And that was interesting, and I did that about 6 months. Mainly I got the job because my cousin was head paymaster.
That type of shipbuilding was initiated because it was faster, and then also before they would use rivets, and rivets, when there was an explosion, the rivets would blow out and they would become more dangerous than the shells themselves. So this is when they first started using weld. Weld was a lot stronger then. I was on one of the ships that was built in Tacoma. We called them jeep carriers because they were small. Remember the cook on board, that guy knew how to make cinnamon rolls. Oh my, they were delicious. There was 2 of us went on board, and I know that one of the ship's officers was down in the wardroom and telling about the integrity of his ship, and he says, "You know that this ship would take 4 torpedoes for it to sink." And the guy says, "Well, I know how it would sink." He says, "One would hit the ship, and the other 2 would pass over the flight deck." That made him kind of mad, but we kind of laughed about it. Yeah. They were used just for storage of extra planes, you know, that we needed out there. In fact, one of the deals that came out was brand new planes came out, model, let's see, was SBW-4s, and we got a whole new models of 5s came out, and they took and dumped all the 4s overboard. Then we went to these jeep carriers and flew the new ones off of that deal. Had new aircraft, almost.
Marilyn, when you were here in Tacoma, did you ever have to practice or go through air raid drills or things like that?
Yes, we did, and we had blackout curtains on all the windows. We had sandbags on every corner in case of incendiary bombs. Those were the main things. Men who were in the service were not supposed to be out without having their uniforms on. I was out on a date one time with a fellow who had gotten into civilian clothes and very nearly was in some trouble for that. Of course, being near Fort Lewis, we were used to having a lot of servicemen around, but not, except for the deprivations of certain things that we couldn't buy. Of course, everybody was worried. Don's mother was terribly worried about him. Life was routine, came to be routine, except that life had not worked out in exactly the same way we'd all thought it would for a few years.
Contrast your experience with World War II with Korean War and the Vietnam War.
Well, by the time that those wars came along, we were married, had children. Don, when the Korean War came along, he was still in the reserves. Later, shortly after that, he left for medical reasons, but I did not want him to go in. When he first finished, he came back and went back to school in the GI Bill, which was a wonderful, wonderful present to give all the servicemen, because they could come back and go to school, everything, tuition. I think there was a stipend for family support. Every bit of supplies that they needed was all covered by the government, and it was a wonderful thing. All they had to do was keep their grades up to a certain level. And then when he finished, surprisingly, had a hard time finding a job. And he wanted to get into the CAA, but there were so many people there ahead of him that had experience in heavy planes.
Is that Civilian Air Corps? Is that
Yes,
CA?
that he was way down on the list and knew that he had to do something different. But he went to work for this wholesale grocery company, and then he stayed in the reserves. And so which meant that he could have been called up had he not then in the meantime been given a medical leave because of his thyroid problems.
How old were you during the entire wartime?
Well, I was 22 at the time. I had just turned 22 at the time that we got married. So it was my years between 18 and 22 when I was in college, when the war was brewing, and then when it was on and finally over then. We were not as close on the Pacific coast. We weren't nearly as close or involved with the European war as we were with the Pacific War. It seemed like a long ways away. Most of our, a lot of the fellows were. One boy I knew in college was killed over Africa in the Army Air Force. He was one of the early ones. But it was mostly my college years.
So were you given mostly information about the Pacific, or more information in Europe, or just kind of?
Well, we didn't have the national news like we do now. It was pretty, I would say pretty much mostly concentrated on the war in the Pacific. We knew it was going on, of course, in Europe, and the newspapers, told us quite a bit. But our main concern was the Pacific War, and of course we had a large population of Japanese that were then interned, and that was a source of concern for most of the people in this area, because many of us had gone to school with Japanese, had known them, had patronized their vegetable shops, knew them one way and another.
Well, thanks for the time for interviewing you guys. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Anytime.